Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Stephen Salyer, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Salzburg Global Seminar, and it's my great pleasure to have all of you with us today for the latest signature public affairs program that we offer today, focusing on new voices in public policy. Our programs, as many of you know, are international, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational, and we strive to be inclusive. Indeed, going back to the very first Salzburg seminar in 1947, convened at Schloss Leopoldskron in Salzburg, we've engaged rising young leaders alongside those already prominent in trailblazing roles. Still, we recognize historical patterns of marginalization and exclusion have held people back from making powerful, meaningful contributions, and whose voices have been missing in the formulation of policy and practice. Addressing this disconnect takes not only passionate individuals, but networks of change makers. This is especially important if we're going to successfully address the major imperatives of the times we are living through. Some of these, certainly not an exhaustive list, include reducing social and economic inequality, advancing racial and gender equality, addressing essential elements of good governance, reversing practices that threaten human health and our planet's sustainability. Salzburg Global's newest program, developed in partnership with the Walt Disney Company, Public Policy New Voices Europe, seeks to provide emerging leaders from diverse backgrounds with tools and connections to become leading players in their communities and to effect positive change. Tonight's Designs on the Future program examines how growing pluralism and multiculturalism in our societies can more fully be reflected in the policy process. What steps can reverse patterns that keep new voices away from the table? How can new leaders stay connected to their communities as they gain experience and power in policy circles? What kinds of networks and mentors can help produce centered, self-aware leaders? It's my pleasure now, without further ado, to hand off to a new voice for this webinar series, Faye Hobson, who is Associate Program Director and leader of our programs in arts and culture and on policy innovation. And Faye will introduce tonight's speakers and moderate our conversation. Faye, it's a great pleasure to hand off to you and to be here in Salzburg with you to kick off this exciting new series.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm delighted to be called a new voice and tonight to be moderating this discussion from our newly renovated Parker Hall, which many of our fellows will be familiar with and is recently been renamed Fellows Hall after all of the inspiring change makers we've had the pleasure to engage over the last 75 years. Our discussion this evening will explore how the inclusion of diverse voices can help to reimagine and redesign the future of public policy in ways that are more equitable, inclusive, and effective. Democratization of policy processes, including by finding ways to engage a wide range of stakeholders at every stage of policy development, can positively transform our approaches to the key challenges of our day and achieve greater impact. The inclusion of underrepresented perspectives has been proven to develop better outcomes in policies. No one knows the needs of a community better than the people in it. A diverse pool of leaders brings with them a unique set of experiences, opinions, and thoughts on critical issues that can help to enhance the government's ability to serve the needs of its entire population, especially historically disenfranchised and marginalized communities. As Stephen mentioned, expanding the field of public policy to include more diverse voices is exactly what we hope to achieve through our newest program in partnership with the Walt Disney Company. The Public Policy New Voices Europe Fellowship is launching on this webinar, so thank you for joining for our launch event. We're currently looking for applications for the very first cohort, so if you're watching this and thinking that sounds like something I want to be involved in, we'll put information about the program and the application process in the chat, and the deadline to apply is by the 30th of September. We're looking for passionate early career public policy makers, implementers, and those of you who are thinking, wow, I'd really love to work in public policy, I just don't know how to go about that. So it's a really exciting program for us, and we're looking forward to having many applications from across Europe for this new initiative. We will also be reaching out to fellows from across our Salzburg Global Network to support the program as mentors and internship hosts. So again, if you're interested in this topic, watch this space and do feel free to get in touch with us to share your ideas. To help us explore more why we need new voices in public policy, we're delighted to welcome two incredible speakers this evening, Jackie Dyer and Michaela Moa. Jackie is a Salzburg Global Fellow, taking part not only in our Siena Health Leaders Network, but also a program on global innovations on youth justice and safety. She's an elected local politician, serving as a deputy leader of Lambeth Council in London. Jackie moved into politics after a career in public mental health and social care, after recognizing a gap in local public policy for people with her background and lived experience. We're delighted that she's joining us this evening from London. Michaela Moa joins us from the European Commission, where she serves as the EU's first ever anti-racism coordinator. So she's working at a very different level of public policy to Jackie. In her role, she liaises closely with people who have minority racial or ethnic backgrounds and relays their concerns to the Commission. Before moving to the multinational level, Michaela worked in both the Ministry of Justice and in several NGOs. She was also an athlete in the national basketball team in her native Finland. She's joining us this evening from Brussels. So welcome both to our speakers. Our conversation this evening will consist of approximately 25 to 30 minutes of conversation between Jackie and Michaela. And before I hand over, after that, I will hand over to my colleague, Louise Hellman, who will open the digital floor to your questions. If you'd like to pose a question in the chat, please feel free to do so. And if your question is selected, one of our team here in Salzburg will contact you and bring you on camera to ask it live to the speakers. So firstly, welcome to my screen, both of our wonderful speakers this evening. And Michaela, I would love to start with you and hear a little bit about how you ended up working in public policy as the EU's first ever anti-racism commissioner. So, please.
Yes, thank you for this question, and thank you first of all for having me here tonight. It's such a pleasure to be able to share with you some of my personal experiences and hopefully inspire the listeners out there also to get into public policy. Yeah, my route hasn't been maybe the most conventional route into public policy. As you mentioned, I have, like, this is a second part of my career, I would say, because the first part of my career was in professional sports. I played basketball professionally for about 10 years around Europe, and I think it was towards the end of my career, having had the chance to do something so that I was so passionate about, I started to question, would I ever be able to find something that I would be as passionate about, that in many ways, on many days, did not even seem like a job. So I think this kind of led me to first, back home in Finland, led me just to I started out as an activist, really working on the grassroots level in anti-racism in Finland, and just as a volunteer, ended up landing some NGO jobs back in Finland. Then had the opportunity to jump into being a civil servant. Worked for the Ministry of Justice in Finland on different EU level projects, EU funded projects on anti-racism. So that's where really I kind of started understanding, getting this bug of the influence you can have at these at that level, in a sense, of working on policy. And then I also had an opportunity to work for the ombuds for the Finnish equality body, where I had the chance to work on a survey on people of African descent in Finland and discrimination faced in employment and in education, which really helped me understand the value of equality data, or data in general, to create equality. And from there, I had this opportunity then I heard about this this job at the Commission, and before I was contacted and asked would I be interested in applying for it, I had just read the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan, and saw that one of the deliverables is appointing an EU anti-racism coordinator. And I was like, wow, that would be an amazing job. And I left it at that. And then about a month and a half later, I was contacted by someone at the Commission, just letting me know, that have you heard about this job, or would you be interested in applying? And of course I was, and I did, and here I am. Now my mandate is actually the implementation of this EU Anti-Racism Action Plan, which is a 5-year action plan that really aims at creating change on the EU level, in member state level, and on the ground in many different ways. But that was my route, not necessarily the most conventional route, but I think it's good to have these kinds of stories as well. And the initial question that I had was, would I ever be able to have a job that I would be as passionate about as I was about basketball? And on most days, it is. It's not easy. It's a challenge, but it's something that I feel like I'm able to really be a part of creating change, which for me is very important.
Thank you so much, Michaela, for sharing a fascinating story. And as you say, maybe not the conventional route, but certainly a very interesting one. And I'm sure you learned a lot in the different roles you had, and also from your career as an athlete as well. So thank you so much. Jackie, I imagine you also have had many sort of different experiences on your route into working in the role you have now. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about your path into public policy.
Yeah, so I think in the first instance, I actually did a degree, my first degree in social policy and public administration. So I always had an interest in the field, but my practice was actually working with different care groups, i.e. People with substance misuse issues, people with mental health issues, children and young people, people with learning disabilities and autism. Always been really attracted to working directly with people who experience real vulnerabilities and disadvantage. And part of the catalyst for that was growing up in a family where I have 3 siblings that experience severe mental illness, and wanting to really understand the system in order to better advocate for my siblings and my family. So that acted really as my wanting to really deep dive into how does the health and social care system, how in action actually really work, because I was struggling to make sense of it in order to assist my loved ones. So that's really, yeah, a major part of my journey. And there was a juncture, a point where my sister became incredibly ill, and in my view, the services, well, actually, in terms of all of us, my mum, my dad, my niece, my nephew, my sister, and especially my sister, the services miserably failed. over an extensive period of about 3 to 4 years, where she was incredibly ill, but there was no intervention that was sustained in supporting her. And the impact on us as a family was really quite shocking. And for me, I made complaints all the way to the chief exec of the system, and realized nobody's listening to me, a Black woman making noise about her sister and the failure of the services to care for her appropriately. And that's when I realized I'm going to have to go to a different level to influence, to help to shape at that lowest sort of like level, where that face-to-face at the grassroots care is being delivered. And that led to me being involved in the ministerial advisory group for mental health that was led by the Department of Health, and being a lived experience advisor. And subsequently from that, being involved in leading nationally, co-leading the mental health task force, which developed mental health policy for NHS England, and another level at low. But I'm not just content at that national level. I actually need to, one of the things that I realized is that there's some really great ideas here, but I don't see them at my local grassroots level. And so for me, it's that interaction between, and removing that distance between what is done as national policy, what is done as regional policy, and what are the threads that need to be enacted at that very local level. And that led to me being involved in local politics, wherein what I wanted to do was pull the best from national, hold the system to account, but drive forward an inclusion of local people to help to shape local policy as a better response to their lives, rather than something that's so disconnected and far from helping them to transform their realities. So inclusivity, co-production, is the centerpiece of what it is that I propel. And lived experience is critical in that. And I mean, for that, in terms of if it be around mental health, the lived experience of people who are experiencing mental health challenges. If that be around employment and skills, some of the lived experience of people who are having barriers in getting into employment or skills or education. If that's, and infused in all of that is paying real attention to the groups that experience the most marginalization, the most discrimination, and the most disadvantage. So threaded throughout each of the strategies that are created, be that national or regional or local, is attention to our Black, Asian, and minoritized groups, groups that have disabilities, and so forth.
Thank you, Jackie. Really important points, I think, and definitely something we're hoping we can play a small part in helping to provide pathways for those more diverse perspectives to be brought into public policy. Michaela, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe what do you, whose voices do you think are missing in the context you're working in? Jackie's mentioned some in her context, and I think laid that out really well, but I'd be interested to see in the European Commission context, what voices do you think are really underrepresented there, and how can we go about bringing them in as well?
Yes, very important question. Thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing your such a personal experience. I think exactly what you mentioned is this lived experience in understanding the impact and effect of policy on the most marginalized people is what is crucial. And this is oftentimes what is missing. At the European Commission level, this is definitely what is missing. With the action plan, I mean, first of all, it was something that was really advocated for already by civil society for a long time. And then last year happened, the murder of George Floyd happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement becoming a global human rights movement happened.
Thank you. Definitely want to come back to solutions, and I think that point around needing data is important, really important for many organizations and institutions. Jackie, I know that you really, you're keen that we don't sort of gloss over the challenges within this that I think Michaela has spoken to as well, and really what are the challenges of bringing in new voices and diversifying those public policy spaces. I'd love to hear a little from you on that, please.
Yeah, I obviously I concur with Michaela's insights there, and I think that from a UK kind of context, there's obviously the same challenges, but they sort of manifest somewhat a bit differently, because we do have equality legislation, for example, our Equality Act, and the duties under that for the public sector, the public sector equality duty. So there is a sort of obligation, if you want to fulfill that public sector equality duty, to collect data, and data around protected characteristics such as ethnicity, age, gender, disability, sexuality, and so on. The challenge is that many public sectors are totally oblivious to really fulfilling that duty. So it's there on paper, a really incredible lever to actually use to improve the lives of diverse communities, but it's not, it's very much underutilized. And we see that really quite profoundly in the field around mental health, particularly when you think about mental health, that when somebody is really ill and really vulnerable, they can be detained with that and lose their liberty. And so it's really important around human rights and equalities that lever to protect people when they're the most vulnerable is really utilized. So systemic racism and systemic oppression and systemic disadvantage that's inbuilt into all our public sector institutions get in the way. And how do you sort of help to disrupt that? Some of that work has to happen internally, and some of it has to be like a sort of disruptor from externally. And so I think that a multi-pronged approach to helping institutions to develop in a way that better meets the needs of the public policy that they're trying to implement is really crucial. And you can't get away from having inclusive representation at every level of the decision-making hierarchy, right? Be that community members, be that people who are involved in public policy, be that politicians, be that voluntary sector and community organizations. The intersectionality and the urgency to make sure that we're more inclusive in our thinking so that we disrupt group thinking that is just continuing to yield the same old results is something that it's not a one-off exercise. It's something that you have to incrementally and actually urgently develop. And so, for example, one of the ways that we do this in NHS England is trying to role model the optimal way of implementing the Equality Act in relation to how we conduct our work. So I lead a task force which is around advancing mental health equalities, and another steering group which is around improving, it's called the Patient and Carer Race Equality Framework. So that's really about bringing more accountability into the system, but where patients and carers and communities have more voice on helping that equality improvement. So their feedback as a consumer, as a customer, is actually the most critical. I don't know who can be the most expert on my experience other than myself. So that applies to any communities and groups. And so what we have is that any of our decision-making or our thinking, like the task force or the steering groups or any task and finish groups or working groups that we have, are actually inclusive in terms of the people that are around the table. And that totally changes the kind of dialogue from some abstract thinking and discussion about the others over there that you haven't got a clue about, to something where everybody's learning, because you're now learning to hear about what it's like from other perspectives and other angles. And that's how you start helping to co-create more inclusive policy, that then you also harness ownership for more bodies to help to implement along the way. Yeah, that's kind of some of what we do.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you also for sort of moving us into the sort of case studies of how we can really be making change. And you mentioned things like bringing in people with the lived experience, role modeling how to create equity in the work that you're doing, and making sure that that really is practically implemented and being lived through the work that you're doing. Michaela, you're working in a big institution, and I imagine that there's maybe other challenges within that, but I'd love to hear some of the solutions or ways in which you're planning to implement the action plan within the Commission, because I imagine it's not an easy task.
Yeah, certainly not, and also because it is the first EU anti-racism action plan, and I am the first EU anti-racism coordinator. I'm starting from zero, so in a sense, I mean that there's immense opportunity here, but it's also quite challenging navigating, trying to figure out the best way to achieve the goal of true diversity and inclusion, because I think diversity is kind of easy to achieve if we think about. I kind of use this metaphor of a this might be the wrong reference group, but and might tell my age, but these Benetton commercials that used to be back in the 90s and still might be, but I haven't seen them around, with these beautiful young people that are like, there was one of, each color in a sense. That's diversity, but how do you make that space inclusive to where everybody with all their differences feels safe in that space, right? And we're currently at the Commission in a place where I think we understand diversity, but we don't understand necessarily, or we're not there yet. What I'm trying to work on is advocating for inclusion and what that means in a big institution like this. One of the best things that has happened so far is that due to this survey that I mentioned earlier, and it's an institution of 30,000 employees, or 30,000 staff total. So due to this survey, my colleagues of color actually found out about themselves. And what has now been created is an affinity group for staff of color, who are now advocating for their own, taking advocacy, taking, an active role in creating change in the institution, instead of just being, subjects of policy, internal policy, where we're not even consulted about issues that affect us. So I think, due to this affinity group, first of all, completely different discussions are being had. And also another important part of creating true inclusion in an institution or any organization is having difficult conversations. Creating change it's very uncomfortable. We're going to have to look in the mirror. We're going to have to see how we have played into perhaps racist, sexist, culture of an organization, of an institution, and we're going to have to come to grips with that. We're going to have difficult conversations, but for change, for cultural change in an institution to truly happen, it's necessary. So this is also something that I'm going to strongly advocate for, having different kinds of fora to have discussions, to talk with each other, to get to really know each other, and understand each other's experience, because, but it's not necessarily, and also, having a shift in culture to where, an institution such as the Commission can truly be a safe space for people with all their differences. It's a process. It's not something that's just going to happen with with me snapping my fingers. My mandate isn't until 2025. That's really just, I think, a time to set structures, put structures in place that will ensure that it's sustainability of this change. So that's what I hope to do. But we're really in such the beginning stages right now that this is one part, the cultural change. There are different parts to this. Of course, looking at recruitment, how do we actually get people in? How are we, personally for me, I didn't understand for the longest time how policy making, how it affected me, or how I would also be able to make change through policy making, until I happened to meet a person who told me about their job, and I'm like, wait, you're doing that at the ministry? I mean, I would love to do, and then so it was really almost like just, I got lucky and I had an interesting conversation with someone instead of already taking that route from whenever. And how do we, I think this is also, if we don't see this is the representation and perception. If I don't see people that look like me in an institution like the Commission, I'm not going to think it's for me. I'm not going to think there's, I'm a welcome to these spaces, etc. So this is what I mean. It's not just a one thing. It really has to be attacked from many different angles, to trainings, to having conversations, to trying to change these structures that are in the way of creating true diversity and inclusion, etc. So these are just some of the ways we are currently working on the issues at the Commission.
Thank you, Michaela. Wow, what a massive mandate you have. It's really impressive to hear the ways you're tackling that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's the need for inclusion, and also the need for people being able to see themselves and find roots into those type of positions. I'd love to hear, we have a couple of minutes left, very briefly, Jackie, from you, maybe how you, what we can be doing to more make sure that public policy is an inclusive and viable career path for minorities, for new voices to enter into. So how can we be helping people or opening up pathways for people to access these kind of jobs?
So I think that what you're doing is helping, providing fellowships for people to learn about the arena and become familiar with what is often languages that are sort of alien. So that's one, and helping people to prepare and be aware of what career pathways and opportunities exist. To support, I suppose, in at that sort of national level, not just sort of like a European level or world level or whatever it is that you operate at, but to support people with making change at their level, wherever they're located, I would say would be really kind of like critical. So what kind of change projects can you support them to help manifest wherever they're kind of like located? And I think it's important for people to have an experience, for me, at really seeing the impact of policy at the local level, because at the end of the day, it's not just it's not national policies for some great and good supposed thinkers to think about, but it's how does that manifest and improve people's lives at that everyday level, that actually you might be able to see some visible change, and it's not just academic. So I think that there's something about how do we support people to understand how to translate policy into action that yields results that are then about the improvement of people's lives, because at the end of the day, public policy is with that sort of purposefulness and intention if it's operating at its best.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point. I think we're now going to open up the floor to bring in some questions from our fellowship, and I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Louise Holman, who is going to moderate the Q&A session. So thank you, Jackie and Michaela, for sharing your thoughts, and we look forward to a lively discussion with our fellows now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both so much for so many useful insights, especially from so many different levels. And you're so right about how it's not just about diversity, it's about inclusion. How do people even see themselves in these spaces? How do they feel like as if they could become part of public policy making? Is really a key part of the program going forward. And in embrace of diversity, we're going to be bringing in a whole bunch of different voices from across our fellowship and also from people in the chat box. And starting out with, we're going to be bringing in Shadeen Al-Masri. She's a PhD candidate at Danube University in Krems, and she's also a fellow of our Education for Tomorrow's World program. And we hopefully have her about to come on screen. Here she is right now. Thank you very much, Shadeen. Over to you to ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much, firstly, and especially to Jackie and Michaela and to Faye, and for the Salzburg seminar in general, obviously, for having this event. I want to start off by saying really thank you to both of you for the really refreshing candor with which you're speaking about this. I know that normally in public policy spaces, we're usually a lot more diplomatic, I think, in the way we approach each other. And I think it was really refreshing to hear about your experience in a very direct way, and also the challenges that you face. And with that, my question is really about the general strategies that you undertake in advocacy. Now, I'm by no means a seasoned policy person, but I think a challenge that I face or that I struggle with, even in kind of these small localized spaces, is the tension that there is between what I call pragmatic activism and kind of the loud media splashes that maybe ruffle feathers, you could say. And I think basically from there, I know that there's preferences and there's arguments on both sides of the equation, like what to go with and when. But I think that also like how to navigate this tension is a question, and also beyond that, how to be pragmatic while also still challenging the structures that make you have to be pragmatic in the first place, if that makes sense, or make you have to kind of appeal in a less, to use their words, aggressive manner, although I would not agree with that term myself. And that's my question to you guys. Thank you so much.
Jackie or Michaela, whoever wants to go first, how can we be pragmatic, even especially with people who might not want to be embracing of diversity in public policy spacing? Jackie, do you want to tackle that one first?
Pragmatic. I often really don't even understand what that word is, to be honest, but navigating between that tension between pragmatism and that sort of really loud sort of like challenge to the system. And this has been a difficult one for me because I've actually been so concerned with not having my voice silenced, because I noticed that within institutions, there's a whole culture of this is how you do things here, that I've actually found that really quite oppressive. And so over time, I've found myself going through a period of having to step outside of that particular culture in order to find and develop my own voice, so that I could stand both in and externally to navigate this particular tension, because I think it's a one that's really quite real. So for me, I've found that I'm very kind of, I almost operate as both a consultant, external, as well as holding sort of part-time sort of positions within organizations. And I've done that purposefully so that I don't lose my voice to be really critical when I need to be. And what I additionally did in order to help to disrupt that cozy cultures that exist within organizations is actually create an organization called Black Thrive to hold the system to account. So it works in partnership with all institutions like the police, the local authority, local government, the health system, but community members are at the center of that, and it's Black led. And so in a borough like my borough, which is predominantly African and Caribbean communities who are disproportionately overrepresented in either the criminal justice system, excluded from school, with mental health challenges, poor housing, unemployed. I really had to start helping the system internally to look at the data, but that we look at the data collectively and help to reshape the system. And when I say the data, it's like the quantitative data about the experiences in each of these spaces, but also really starting to embrace the qualitative data that emerges from communities about the reality of their experience. And so we are grappling together in making these transformations, but it's from a different sort of power relationship. And it's very uncomfortable, believe you me, for many stakeholders. But I think sustained attention to that is starting to yield some of the changes that really need to be made.
Michaela, how are you approaching this within the European Commission? Pragmatically or more radically?
Yeah, I think I can relate to what Jackie said, some of what Jackie said, in the sense that because I come from an activist background, but I'm now a civil servant in this huge institution, I keep struggling on how do I with the heart of an activist, but this job in this institution, how do I balance these two? But I think this is exactly the type of people we need in institutions, because we are actually the people who are pushing policy further. We will, I'll just say it. I think my job as the anti-racism coordinator is to keep people a little bit uncomfortable. Because when we're having these uncomfortable conversations, we're actually talking about the actual thing. We're not talking about the thing next to the actual thing. We're talking about the thing. And that's uncomfortable. But then it starts, because we're actually talking about it, it starts to get comfortable. We start to see that why it's important to take different lived experience into account, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I would say that I'm starting to get comfortable with having people in the room be uncomfortable, you know? And just when they think that they couldn't get any more uncomfortable, I'll just turn it up a notch. You know, I think this is my job as the anti-racism. That's what it is. It is dismantling oppressive structures. And I think to some extent, perhaps the actual definition of this word is just now starting to be understood. But that's actually what it is. But I am struggling. I'm trying to navigate on how to be these both things at the same time. But I think that's how I try to, and always keeping it honest, because I'm constantly also advocating. But how do I do it without having just complete pushback and shut down to where nothing moves forward? So this is the balance that I'm trying to figure out. But I think it's always keeping people a little bit outside of the comfort zone. So
yeah, very, very fine balance to try and to navigate. And thank you so much, Shadeen, for your question. We're now going to bring in one of our fellows from the US, who is Melvin Henley, is the coalition manager at Community Economic Development Association of Michigan in Detroit. He's a fellow of our Cultural Innovators Forum, and bring him on screen now to also pose a question to. So over to you, Melvin, or Vinny, rather, I should prefer.
No worries. Hello, all. Thank you so much for the opportunity to listen to what you all have to say. It's been very delightful up to this point, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation. So as was mentioned, I'm based in the US, so that's my frame of reference, but would love to hear from your point of view. I've been doing advocacy policy work for the past 18 months or so. Still relatively new, but have had some baseline. But I would love to hear if you have any strategies related to how best center like the DEI conversation amidst the political game or political aspect and kind of the shifting nature of policy work. I've had elected officials in so many words say like, we really dig what you're saying. We want to support it and agree that, residents, communities, organizations need more resources, but can never vote for it because it doesn't align with political lines, or they've done enough for vulnerable populations, or like it doesn't have a large enough economic impact, or like it's just not where our political focus area is at this time. So how do you take those blows, but still try to drive the conversation forward in a meaningful and intentional way amidst that, it is politics. There is, political nature that's involved. And this is elected officials at, at the senator, representative level, or even like the governor's office, and whatever that translates to, whether it's like MPs or other folks in your respective spaces.
So how do you, the bureaucrats, keep the politicians moving the conversation forward? Michaela or Jackie, want to tackle that one for us? Go on, Jackie.
I was going to say, Michaela, you start first this time.
Okay, I'll try. I think for me, it's simple in the sense that my mandate is the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. So it's currently not that that complicated for me, because I do have this College of Commissioners is very committed to, the equality file, in a sense. We have the very first EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. We have the very first LGBTIQ strategy, gender equality strategy. So we have, that really makes my job in that sense easier. But what I not necessarily just based on my experience now at the Commission, but my previous job was at the Ministry of Justice, etc. What I find more challenging is these gatekeepers in the middle. So kind of the gatekeepers that even if the support is there on the top, that there are certain gatekeepers keeping from certain policy advancing at different levels or slowing down the work. And this is what I find the most difficult navigating around when you're in an institution with these hierarchies, and sometimes you just have to go directly to the top, But yeah, I think one thing is, of course, patience. Patience is needed. When you think about when we think about previous, for instance, human rights movements, how does change come about in general with the women's liberation movement, LGBTIQ equality, etc. What has always had to happen is for the people who are not affected to have enough people who are not affected by the racism or discrimination or sexism to come behind, to stand behind the that no, this needs to move forward. This is not okay, but this is not necessarily something also that will just happen quickly. But typically, these are the people, kind of the middlemen that need to get on the side of the thing, so to speak. And this is the route I try to oftentimes take. The people that are on the fence, that are, yeah.
Jackie, how do you find this working at the local level? Obviously, a slightly smaller level, potentially a lower level, closer to the people who you're trying to serve than perhaps Michaela is at the Commission. But what political struggles do you face in that regard, in that context?
So, thinking about the questioner's sort of like mandate, in a sense, is really quite important. Who are the people that you are working with, that you are advocating on behalf of, that are with you on the battlefield, so to speak? So that for me is one of the most important sort of sources of power, actually. So how do you elevate that power base to be influential in these spaces? And so particularly pertaining to the Black community, I thought it was important to get support for a body of recommendations that we had co-produced across the system, which was about improving I'm giving you an example, the mental health and well-being of African and Caribbean communities within the borough. Now, when that body of recommendations was created, I wasn't actually elected, when I started to co-chair this commission, but when it was when the recommendations were completed, which there were 40, and there were whole system recommendations, not just targeted at the mental health system, I was elected. Now I was like, really, oh, great, we've co-produced these set of recommendations for a huge part of our constituents. And now the local authority, the local government is going to be really delighted that they've got these recommendations to implement. Naive. And so what I realized is that actually I'm not going to rely on them completely, because in that relying on them, I'd be waiting forever and a day. And I didn't want to dishonor from my role, making sure those recommendations that were co-created with the communities were not in some way going to be manifested. So for me, it was about then getting creative, about looking for where can I get additional resources to support that voice to be strengthened, that would then have a different kind of relationship with the local sort of like government and the system. And so I think it's about, and that's what's manifesting itself at this time. So actually by doing it in that sort of a different way and empowering, in a sense, the community body or entity, that creates that entity now having conversations with different parts of the system, particularly that which is around health, around children's social care and education. So there is an entity that is holding both the system to account, but also supporting it to improve through having those difficult conversations around its particular policies and procedures right inside there, not at a high level, but right inside there, that helps it to move towards anti-racist, anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive practice. So for example, being able to scrutinize and co-produce a particular strategy that's going to have an impact on the Black communities and making sure that it's fit for purpose. So actually what you're doing is empowering communities to be involved in a very cross-cutting, dynamic way within the whole policy-making kind of a body, particularly in areas which affect their liberty and wanting to improve, knowing full well that what's already gone on for decades and decades has produced very little improvement for those communities. So it's clear we have to do it differently.
Yeah.
And that inclusivity is the key.
The bringing people in from, it's really a sort of grassroots bottom-up approach and not necessarily waiting for the people at the top to create the change that is really needed sort of on the ground. And then, but it's both ends, you know, as Michaela said, sometimes you need to cut out the middlemen and go to the top. So thank you very much, Vinny, for your question. We're now going to bring in another one of our, not a fellow, but one of our former interns we had here at Salzburg Global Seminar. As Stephen said at the top of the program, our programs are here in Salzburg are very interdisciplinary. And one of the things that Edwin is going to be asking us, Edwin Cruz is a filmmaker based in San Diego, and he has a question about how we can be more sort of interdisciplinary in our approach. Over to you, Edwin.
How's it going, everyone? Nice to meet you. So I'm one of the co-founders of the Wimpasso Collective, who was formed to try and strive to provide voices for those that often don't have a voice. And so we're often sort of addressing issues that are impacting immigrants, children, Indigenous women. And so myself as a filmmaker, I've thought about public policy, but I'm all the way in the arts and humanities. And so I'm wondering, is there a way to reach out to minorities in other professions and encourage them to take an interdisciplinary approach and engage directly in public policy? Can we create programs that are inclusive for the educators, writers, artists, and filmmakers?
Yeah, how can we at either the EU level or the local level bring artists and filmmakers into the public policy sphere? Jackie or Michaela, do you have any experience of this in either of your contexts?
So, more recently, and it was sort of prevented via our whole sort of lockdown and COVID process, there is a theatre, the Young Vic Theatre in London, that has been working with Black Thrive Global to develop a sort of interdisciplinary event that on the one hand has theatre, which is around Black mental health, but providing workshops that go alongside that to have those discussions about what does that mean for mental health policy. That for me is a serious example of how you can do that, and making sure that the audience is made up of those policymakers, those stakeholders that have that power to influence and shape going forward. And then to have that really facilitated kind of purposeful direction, using the art as a catalyst to think differently.
Has there been experiences of this in the EU Commission as well, Michaela, with bringing art and artists into the policymaking space and having that sort of direct discussion?
Maybe in a sense, I don't know if this would count, but before, this is from my experience when I worked for the Ministry of Justice in Finland. We had the opportunity in the project I was working for to work on a national anti-racism campaign, it was really to support also the national action plan that just was published recently. So this campaign was published recently in Finland, and I in a sense was because I was the project manager, I was able to kind of decide who I would, for instance, like to be part of you know, who I would like to kind of produce and write the script. So I made sure that these were people of color, first of all. And then I was adamant about that the commission, the ministry should use the word anti-racism in this project. And in a sense, I had to fight for it. And eventually it ended up being used in this project. And it might not seem like quite a big deal, but I think because of the fact that there was a person of color who was able to even dream big enough to understand the importance of a government agency using the word anti-racism in this campaign, which then I had to leave. I had to come here, but it's now in the campaign, and it's hashtag I am anti-racist, and it's I mean, doing amazingly. But now the fact that a government agency is actually advocating for anti-racism, it's not a small thing. The fact that the ministry was able to see these incredible creatives that are behind this, you know, this audiovisual material, kind of also they were able to now realize that, okay, there's more we can do. So in a sense, because of this process of creating this audio-visual, I don't know if it counts as art or whatever, sorry, I'm not you know, an expert on that, but I do think that this whole process, it really depended on, I mean, the fact of who was in the room and able to even be brave enough to make these suggestions. And this process for the ministry now kind of opened their eyes to understand really like what more they can do, how you know, how in different ways they can perhaps really use, for instance, anti-racism tools to further better the situation in Finland, etc. So this is just an example, but I mean there are many ways, of course, that art can be used to further human rights. I think I have friends in that area, and yeah.
So bringing artists not only into the initial sort of like information of the campaign itself, whether it's having policymakers in the audience, but then also working with artists and filmmakers like yourself, Edwin, to then share that sort of policy change out back into the community and to bring more voices into that sharing of experience and progress going forward also. So hopefully you've got some thoughts for your and next week. I know that Edwin's been working on some really exciting projects, so looking forward to sharing those further as well. Our next fellow that we've got to bring in is Maria Goretti from Uganda. She's also part of our Education for Tomorrow's World series. She's been to Salzburg many times. We bring her in from Uganda now. Over to you, Goretti.
Hi, thank you very much, Louise, and very many thanks to the presenters. It's been very, very inspiring. But one of my major takeaways for this evening is the statement that Jackie made, that really policy is not effective at all unless you see the changes and improvements that it makes at local level. And I work in a civil society that organization that does research and tries to influence policy in education. And I think we've spent more time to influence what happens at national level and less at the local level. So I would be interested to really learn from Jackie on what challenges she has experienced from her experience by trying to translate national policy into practices that improve lives at local level, and if there are any challenges, how she has tried to overcome them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a great question, because really that is the nub of the issue for me, is when I think, for example, around mental health policy, no health without mental health, and sitting in the Department of Health in Whitehall, across from Downing Street, you know, all that shebang, and with the great and the good around the table, only myself representing the diverse community that people around the table are serving, that kind of really was quite painful for me. But for me, it's about synthesizing whatever is good there, knowing that that's national policy, influencing that national policy, and then bringing it, because now we've got a shared language, whether or not it's being implemented locally or not, or the understanding of it is really rather amateur or not really harnessed, about using that language at that local level. And so for me, one of the strongest levers I've managed to help to lead on that agenda is around using my political leadership to keep that those conversations on the table. So having to push not a lot of people want to be local politicians. That's another thing, from our communities. And I didn't want to be in such a position until I understood from a councillor, a politician that was pushing me, Jackie, it needs people like you in this political decision maker. Can you really care about the people and whatever? And we don't know as much as like what you do because of your lived experience. I didn't want to do it, but I did it because I knew that it would be a lever to help to move the agenda forward. And so that's one of the really important lessons for me, that using that lever as a local politician, plus that accountability space of that Black Thrive partnership, which I've led from inception and chaired that journey, has provided different kind of ways to keep the agenda on the table and keep it moving. So I've also had portfolios as a local, as a politician, and gone up the hierarchy, i.e. being in the cabinet. So a cabinet member with responsibility for health and social care, for example, has enabled me to really push that agenda further, to be much more inclusive and reflect good policy, but also to push it further to transform in a way that actually really effectively meets the needs of the population. And the other thing is around having built relationships with stakeholders at all different levels. So be that the CEO of the mental health trust or the chief lead of the police or the strategic director for children's social care, you know, maintaining that stakeholder engagement alongside the ongoing engagement with our communities and helping them to think, helping the communities to believe that this time it's going to be different, right? This time it's really going to be different, and we're going to do this together as a community, that then you're supporting me to do what it is that I'm doing, and it's a bi-directional relationship. I'm only here because of you. And so using a range of levers is what I would say helps me to be really effective in what it is that I do. And it's strange that as a Black woman, and I have to speak from that position, as a Black woman, it's been a nightmare, actually, from the starting point as being a councillor, a politician, wanting to run away most of the time because of the ferocity of the racism, people not even realizing how racist they are, you know, and having to stay on that battlefield to deal with the racism because I've got right at the center of the purpose why I'm there, not me and my ego, but actually the best interest of the populations, the diverse populations that we're serving, but actually the worst harmed we need to attend to and stop sweeping it under the carpet. So for me, it's a range of kind of like levers, but I've got the mandate and the support of our population sort of supporting me to stay in the game, because it's a very hard game. I don't want people to feel sort of like it's all very nice. It isn't. But one of the things, because there's a lot that you're dealing with, that systemic structural inequities and things that have been there for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So how can we come in just now and transform that overnight? It's not going to happen, but persistence gets you there, and support.
The persistence, accountability, and support are how Jackie has been serving her community and driving that up nationally as well. Thank you so much, Jackie. I know that you're unfortunately having to leave us. If you were able to stick around for one more question, that'd be great, but otherwise we totally understand. Thank you so much. Thank you also very much, Mary Goretti, for your question. And the last question that we have actually lined up is a question directed to Michaela, actually. This is coming from Ricardo Saka, who's a student at Maastricht University, and we're going to bring him on camera now. Over to you, Ricardo.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak. This question was initially meant for Coordinator Mua, but if Ms. Dyer wants to answer too, it would be very welcome and insightful. My question was, in my opinion, diversity is intrinsically linked with the EU, but I was wondering how does someone who is successful and works in an environment like the EU define diversity? Is it strictly racial based, or you also think about underrepresentation as maybe member state underrepresentation?
Thank you for your question. It is currently looked at, mostly from the gender perspective and from member state perspective as far as underrepresentation. And disability, I believe as well. What we are trying to now, with this anti-racism action plan, the idea is to understand diversity from an intersectional viewpoint, understanding all these different protected characteristics, you know, and also understanding that we are not just, a person is typically not just one thing. So the idea now is to truly understand diversity and inclusion, meaning from all these different angles. And we are now looking at ways in how to make that happen, you know. One thing we're looking at is the Blue Book trainee program is currently under reconstruction, so to speak, to see, it's going through a whole diversity and inclusion screening and looking at how we can start perhaps collecting data on what kind of applicants we are getting, because this is again the data we need to understand why or why not, who or who not is even looking into the commission as an option. So as far as the anti-racism action plan, it specifically mentions the intersectional viewpoint, meaning that even though it's an action plan really at its core, looking to combat racism, meaning from the viewpoint of racial and ethnic origin, but also recognizing this intersectional viewpoint that there are different intersecting characteristics that can affect the way discrimination, racism can then manifest. I hope I was able to answer your question.
And Jackie, do you have any further points to add on that? What is diversity to you? Obviously, you've spoken a lot about being a Black woman in Lambeth, but what does this mean any further than that for you?
So I agree with Michaela. It's about diversity in every way. We have to think in an intersectional way going forward, and so that we're fit for the purpose of being in a humane and inclusive society, which when you look at the impact of COVID, and when you look at George Floyd, many of us will say that George Floyd has been going on for the longest. So but the beauty of the advancement of social media and film means that it's in everybody's front room and in everybody's hands. So we can see what the reality of an oppressive, discriminatory and racist society is. And so that is inclusive of all groups, be that LGBTQ+, be that in terms of your disability, be that in terms of your gender, be that in terms of your ethnicity, and the intersectionality of that. We need to be much more sophisticated in understanding how that impacts on your lives and worlds, your communities, and be much more responsive from that dimension. It's asking us, this time, it's asking us to think fundamentally different and move away from lazy thinking, you know, and be prepared to be wrong. You know, I don't know I really just don't understand why everybody needs to be right and everybody needs to be the font of all knowledge on everybody else's experience. I just don't get it. So I think that it's really important to keep at the center who we are serving and be of our best to serve them. And that means being really rigorous in terms of diversity, inclusion, and so forth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your question. Thank you to all of our people this evening who've asked questions. I'm going to bring Faye back on to us now for a short wrap up and also possibly one final question. Over to you, Faye.
Thanks, Louise. Yes, thank you to both of our speakers and to all of the people who've asked such really enlightening questions. I hope that it's been inspiring for those of you who are listening and thinking, what is public policy, or how to even approach that as a career path. Listening to Jackie and Michaela has been really inspiring for me, and I hope for all of you as well. Both of our speakers reminded us of the importance of having people who have lived experience to be engaged with the policies that affect their lives, and that we need as sort of citizens and generally to build our understanding of how policymaking at the local, national, supranational level really affects our lives, but also how it can be influenced as well, and how we can all play a role in changing that. We heard about the really strong need for an intersectional approach, and that you sometimes have to create change within institutions by influencing both internally, like Michaela is doing with the Commission, but also externally as well, and using bottom-up approaches and community-based approaches to create change. It can be a very effective approach. We also heard about how that we need to move beyond diversity to really be thinking about inclusion. And that in order to dismantle oppressive structures and systems, we need to be prepared to have difficult conversations and be uncomfortable. And that we can use mediums like theatre and other creative approaches to change people's minds. And that really both patience and persistence are key key to moving things forward within a policymaking space as well. Michaela, I think Jackie's unfortunately had to drop off, but we're really happy you were able to stay with us. And I just wanted to ask you for some closing reflections, and also maybe one piece of advice that you would share to somebody maybe who's at the start of their career or interested in a career in public policy. What advice would you give? What do you wish you had known sort of at the start of your journey?
Thank you. I was on mute. Can you hear me now? Perfect. First of all, thank you once again so much for having me here today. It was so inspiring to hear Jackie, you know, talk and tell me about her experience, like in a sense, a peer working in public policy. I think this was such a learning experience for me, and gave me a lot of tools on how to better ensure that I succeed during my mandate. And thank you so much to everybody for the interesting questions. I think understanding, you know, the opportunity that really exists in public policy making, as Jackie mentioned, you know, there are different levels of policy making. I'm currently working on the EU level, and I think for people on the ground, it's possible that they do not really see the link between what we're doing on the EU level, what is the legislation that we're making on the EU level, that how does it really connect to their personal lives, but actually it's all around them, you know. The fact that, like, for instance, with this EU National Action Plan, just to give you an example, EU Action Plan Against Racism, we have encouraged all member states to adopt their respective national action plans by 2022. And within these national action plans, we of course encourage them also to kind of let it dribble down to the local level, so that local levels also have their national action plans, exactly so that these local contexts where people really live, the grassroots level, that it really, in a sense, touches, affects people's lives. Also legislation, the Commission is the place where legislation, a lot of legislation is made. For instance, the EU anti-discrimination legislation comes from to protect people who are experiencing racism and discrimination, for instance, in employment, in education, etc. It comes from the Commission. So there's a lot of areas where I feel like I am really able to create change that eventually will reach the people that I am, you know, doing this for. And I can also relate to the fact that as a Black woman, of course, this is something that who has personal experiences with discrimination and racism, and has peers, family members, etc., who have experienced racism and discrimination, always keeping, you know, that in mind. Who am I really doing this work for? Even though I'm now in this institution, essentially that's where the work, you know, that's who the work is done for. So I think it's just an incredible opportunity really to be able to work on something that is meaningful, to create change, to create the types of societies that we want to live in. That is, in essence, what policymaking is really about.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Such powerful words to end on, and I can't really say much to sum that up. I think you said it perfectly. Just wanted to really extend our thanks from Salzburg Global to you, to Jackie, and to all of those who posed questions in the chat. I will be a little opportunistic and do a final plug for applications for the Public Policy New Voices Europe Fellowship. We do really encourage anyone who's listening and being inspired by today's webinar to apply for that fellowship and get involved in the work that we're doing around that. I'm going to pass back now to Stephen, and Stephen's going to close us out for this evening. So thank you from me, Michaela. It was lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Michaela and Jackie. That was an extraordinary conversation, and we can't thank you enough for stimulating such a very profoundly important conversation. I wanted just to add to what Faye said, that finding people who meet the criteria of this program is going to depend on the help of all of you, both if you decide you're interested and want to apply, or if you know someone who you think really could benefit and contribute to this program. I hope you'll reach out to them. Many people ask us, how do you find the people who ultimately become Salzburg Fellows? In the early days, people literally traveled all over Europe trying to follow up leads and interview people and so forth. Today, we live in a pandemic-limited moment with social media utilized much more for communication than in-person travel and meetings. And yet the same problem is still there. How do you, among a sea of able, talented people, find those who really could be put on steroids by an experience like this, if I can put it that way, to be even more effective as change makers and influencers in their communities and in their societies? So we need your help, and I hope you will not be shy about following up between now and the end of the month, when we're hoping to have a strong group of applicants. So much to think about and be inspired by. I was so gratified to hear words like inclusion and making people uncomfortable, and pragmatism inside and outside of institutions, and connecting communities to the policy process. We need all of this, and we're only going to get it through an investment of people like those who have been on the call today and who are attracted to join this effort. Final thing I wanted to say is, we've had a bunch of questions about, how old do you need to be to apply or not apply and all of this. And this program has set some parameters for what it's looking for this inaugural New Voices Europe effort. But Salzburg Global Seminar runs a lot of programs and seminars that people of all ages and backgrounds qualify for. And please do look at our website. If you don't fit the criteria for this program, there may be another thing that we're doing that speaks to you and to which you would bring a great deal. So first of all, help us have this great start to this New Voices Europe program. And if you are so inclined, look at other things that Salzburg Global is offering as well, and let us hear from you. So I'll stop there. Again, my thanks to my colleagues and to our panelists today. This has just been an outstanding session from my perspective, and I look forward to more good things happening in this program. All the best. Stay well.